It's my privilege to give the talk this month on how I recreated Bach's Long Hike 3 centuries later when I was a music critic for the Times. To give my story more appeal, I dressed as Bach in frock coat, breeches, tights, jabot, the frilly white thing at my neck, and wig, hired from a Covent Garden fancy dress shop, which was ignorant of my intended use. They thought I was going to wear it on the stage, not cross Germany in rain or shine. Oh, where is the picture of me wearing the costume? Was that the one before? Or was it the one after, maybe? Okay, so each time you click that, I do beg your pardon, everyone. Thank you for your indulgence.
I'm using the keynote on the presentation.
Yeah.
On Zoom, but this is PowerPoint and it doesn't seem to have all the same slides.
No, well, I wonder if I should have saved it as the other one, but let's carry on anyway. The walk begins in Arnstadt, as you see on your screen, in the old East Germany. The border with the Czech Republic's near to the south. It ends in Lübeck on the Baltic, 250 miles north. So if you keep clicking, if you click, the words will appear. So there should be an Arnstadt coming up at the bottom. So there's Arnstadt, Lübeck in the north. I travelled out by Eurostar and Deutsche Bahn, and I was met at Arnstadt by the entire Stadt marketing department, which consisted of 2 people. How was the journey geographically? Across the middle are the Harz Mountains, so there's the Harz, where highwaymen lurked, followed by the sparsely populated Lüneburger Heide, 50 miles of heath. It's unsure whether Bach went round the edge, where he could stay with relatives, or took the most direct but risky route. For me, there was a deadline and a train to catch, so I would have to take the quickest way, and calculating that the chance of getting beaten up and robbed was less in 2005 than 1705, I opted for the mountains. Anyway, I bought a stick for my security from Catford's pound shop and surprised myself by how much more protected I then felt. So what happened? Carry on, there's my arrow, and the next arrow, click again, there it is. So that's the journey I took, through the Harz Mountains, then the Lüneburger Heide, and either side of those 2 geographical features, the towns on the way. So there we are, there I am in my costume, on my way. I didn't really look like Bach, it's true. I had a goatee beard, which none of the composer's portraits show. The wig was more what Mozart would have worn, and footwear was a pair of lightweight Nike tennis shoes. But who can say how J.S. Bach appeared? The statue of him in the market square at Arnstadt. Next one. This is not a saved version of the slides, unfortunately. Is it possible to use the slides on the keynote? Are you sure? There it is. There's Bach, the statue of Bach at Arnstadt. In the market square at Arnstadt, shocked his devotees in 1985 when it was unveiled on his tercentennial. The sculptor, Bernd Goebel, had carved a young man leaning on an organ stool, perhaps, his head bare and his shirt undone, his right hand resting on the keys, his left hand pulling stops. his gaze directed north to Lübeck, whither his ambition drove him. Actually, he's also looking at the church that first employed him as an organist in 1703 when he was 18. So that's the Bach church in Arnstadt. Neukirche, or New Church, which it was because the old one in the 30 Years' War had been torched. St. Boniface is what it was before. In fact, it's called the Bachkirche today. Its squat exterior defies the space inside. The double galleries, no different from a theatre, the pale green woodwork, and the organ, through whose gleaming pipes Bach blasted out the Lutheran chorales. Inside, I meet a member of the choir who tells me how it was before the turn in 1989, the good old days. The turn, die Wende, the turn is the end of communism, 1989, when the two Germanys were united. The choir was better off, she says. The costs have risen, but the income not, from ticket sales, recordings, and state subsidies. But on the other hand, the communists were sensitive about the function and the purpose of religion, and the choir had been permitted only to perform inside the church and never out of doors. After the turn, they could. The marketing department has booked a room for me at the Hotel Goldener Sonne. There it is. The hotel has Bach connections. The Bach family included numerous relations all over the state of Thuringia, which is where we are in Germany, who met annually at the hotel for a party. Johann Sebastian's father, Johann Ambrosius, town piper of Eisenach, his brother, Johann Christoph, and guardian of Johann Sebastian after their parents died, who was organist at Ordhof, his uncle, Johann Michael, organist at Geren, another uncle, Johann Christoph, his father's twin, here at Arnstadt, and other Bachs, all musicians, at Erfurt, the state capital, Weimar, where Sebastian would later work, Gotha, Sondershausen, Bad Tennstedt, Ilfeld, and so on. Bachs were so numerous and all involved in music that the name became synonymous with the profession in the 17th and 18th centuries. Almost all of them took the name Johann, so that inevitably they were called by their second name, as Sebastian himself was all his life. The Hotel Goldener Sonne has been run by the Schochinger family since 1899. The manager knows all about the Bach family gatherings, he tells me at breakfast, pouring coffee. They drank large amounts of beer, wine, and coffee, and he has the receipts to prove it. He tells me that they gathered to say goodbye to Johann Jakob Bach, who had signed up as an oboist in the Swedish army, and for which young Sebastian had written the Capriccio for the departure of a favourite brother, while he, Sebastian, was still at school at St. Michael's, Lüneburg, where I was headed. The manager hums the little tune. He says it tells the story, the piece of music, of the journey in music, the pitfalls on the way, the glum friends left behind, the arrival of the mail coach, which is that octave leap in the tune. He says it is an appropriate tune for the start of a journey and apologizes for holding me up from starting mine. The Stat marketing team show up and take me on a tour of the town, including the museum where they have Bach's original organ console. I am sorry, we'll have to use the other set of slides, the keynote. Is it not possible to look at those?
I tried to connect that to the projector and we couldn't get a picture of it, so I have to use this. Sorry about that.
Okay, well,
where shall I go back to?
Go back. That's airport. So go back one more. Back one more. That's the and one more. That's the Hotel Golden Hosanna. So I'll just have to remember that the bathhouse is next. Sorry, everybody. The Stadt marketing team show up and take me on a tour of the town, including the museum where they have Bach's original organ console and his organ-playing shoes, in which he walked many hundreds of miles on the organ pedal board alone. And it was as if his cross-country walks were simply continuations of the long repeating bass lines which he trod out on his instrument. Bach never left Germany and only once or twice left his home state of Thuringia. His contemporary Handel, by contrast, travelled all over Europe and ended up living here in England. And it's interesting the contrast between the two musicians. However, with Bach, although he never travelled very far geographically, he did travel many miles by walking within Thuringia, usually to test out organs which had been built, and he was sought as an expert on organ playing to turn up at out of the way towns and villages to test these new instruments. And of course his shoes, which he used for walking, also represent the pedal board of the organ. He plays, in my imagination at least, many hundreds of miles of themes on the organ pedal board. The organ pedal board is a German invention. It came here later on in the 18th century, but it was a part of music tech that Germany was responsible for. The museum's 16th century painting of the town shows the walls, which are still largely intact, though the fields around it are now built on as far as the hills, which provide exercise for joggers and marathon runners. In the northwest corner of the town is the white Schloss Neideck, with its enormous tower still showing the scars of cannon shot from the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, in which half the male population of Germany was wiped out, and a third of all the towns and villages and castles destroyed by the marauding mercenary armies that swept uncontrolled through the country. And the house of Sebastian's uncle, Johann Christoph. So where is that Bach house picture now? The next one. There it is. This is the sign outside the house that Bach lived, 7 Kohlgasse, where the 20-year-old lived with the Bach motif outside the door, B-A-C-H. There you see the notes written down. In old music, a scale had a flattened seventh from C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. That made a scale. Instead of C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, a sharpened seventh comes later. And because of that new innovation, B flat remained as B, but the sharpened note becomes known as H in German music. So Bach, B-A-C-H, was able to spell his name with this clever little tune. B-A-C-H, ba-da-dee-dee. And that tune is used by Bach in many works, and then subsequently by admirers of Bach down history have used that tune to represent their admiration for the composer. He lived in this house with his uncle Johann Michael and 2 of his cousins, Barbara and Maria Barbara, who were not the daughters of the uncle. They were other Bach, they came from another Bach family, Johann Christoph's family at Geren. But all these Bachs lived in the same house together. and she was with him. So this is now Barbara, his cousin, when he fought the town bassoonist Geiersbach beside the fountain here beneath his church. Okay, we'll have to skip that then. I do beg your pardon, everyone. So we'll stay at the Bach house. Just below the church there is a fountain where Bach had a fight with the town bassoonist, Geiersbach. He had previously insulted Geiersbach by telling him that when he played his instrument he sounded like a goat. And Geiersbach, not surprisingly, was insulted, also because his father and grandfather had played the bassoon. So insulting his bassoon playing was, in a sense, to insult his entire family. And this turned into fisticuffs. Bach drew his sword and lunged at Geiersbach, who had struck him, and cut his coat. Fortunately, nothing more serious than that. But Barbara, his cousin, restrained him and, fearing disaster, managed to stop any further altercation. So that is to show that Bach's personality in Arnstadt was somewhat wild as a young man. He was teaching there, didn't get on with teaching, was often angry with the pupils, and he was growing out of his existence there. It is a small town, and Bach had ambitions, which is why he sets off for Lübeck in something of a huff after this row with Geiersbach. So when I did this in 2005, the Stadt marketing department welcomed me, put me up in the hotel, which I was very grateful. They were getting a piece and a mention in the Times, so it was worth it. And then the local press turned up. The Thüringer Allgemeine Zeitung took pictures, interviewed me on the steps of the fountain, asked daft questions like, what have you got in your rucksack? And what does your wife think of all of this? And I set off. And so I followed the River Gera north from Arnstadt to the next picture, which is Erfurt, 20 miles away. So this was a good foot slog of a day. The fountain was the starting point. I've told you that. I set off along the banks of the River Gera beneath a line of mature horse chestnut trees, which were saplings when Bach walked the route 250 years previously. Erfurt, which is the state capital, with its colourful half-timbered buildings in the Fachwerkstil, which is that characteristic German style of architecture, antique-looking, and even built over the river. My feet hurt and I stopped to rest mid-afternoon. Schoolgirls approached me. They want to know the meaning of my costume. They discover I am English and practice their pop song idioms, asking if I have had one-night stands. Later, walking through a park, young boys wish to know where I am going. To Lübeck. Wow, we're coming too, they say. And for a while I look like the Pied Piper of Hamelin. They peter off after a while. I booked no room for the night, and though I had intended to walk further, the Hotel Park Isa has a vacancy, and I stopped to bathe my feet. I didn't book any hotels on this journey. I simply set off, and wherever the day came to an end, I would find what I could, book whatever. It was late October, so the chances of these places having rooms spare was reasonably good. So recovered, the next day I walk on, greeting fellow travellers to Schwerstedt, where I spend an hour in a pub at lunch. Schwerstadt, hard town, from the thickness of the clay soil. A pensioner tells me He says he was 15 when the war broke out. Fathers left and teenagers like himself did the work, which mainly consisted of lifting 100-kilo sacks of potatoes. I ask about life before and after Die Wende, the term, the end of communism, 1989. A woman says, on balance, she prefers the present. In the past, they had variety: potatoes, garlic, cabbage, fruit, beetroot, carrot, cauliflower grew here. But now plots, many hectares in size, are given to one intensively produced crop, and variety exists only in the shops. But now the town is wealthier. They have affluence, and the streets are so tidy you can walk from end to end barefoot. In the past, there was no worklessness, Arbeitslosigkeit, but now unemployment is 20% in the new city town. And yet she concludes with a sigh, freedom is the most important thing. Freedom to travel, freedom not to be spied on. She says the hotel across the road was once full of Stasis, and you had to be careful what you said, even in the bar late at night. I continue to Sondershausen, a city at the foot of the Harz Mountains, which are supposed to be full of witches, the mountains. The youth hostel has a room. A birthday party is beginning, and when the guests see me, they insist on me attending in my costume. It is the 62nd birthday of Renata Kuhnemund, who sits beside me and plies me with champagne and cake. I eat 2 slices of plum flan and a large triangle of birthday cake, a plump sponge with a filling of gooseberries and cream, and am taken aback when more food arrives. Salmon, veal, vegetables brought in on trays by the hostel staff. The guests were teachers at a famous East German school, Ernst-Thälmann-Schule, which achieved gymnasium or grammar school status after the term, although many teachers were sacked. It had been named after the founder of the German Communist Party, who opposed Hitler in the 1932 election, was imprisoned by the Gestapo a year later, and executed at Buchenwald in 1944. That's Ernst Thälmann. And these teachers were very fond of their history, their heritage, and having had their school, not all of them survived the turn, but they committed themselves to meeting every year at each other's birthdays, this group of teachers. It occurs to me that I have found the Harz witches ahead of schedule. Try and the witches in the Harz Mountains are represented in many places. The party becomes extremely raucous and drunken. Jokes are told, and there is great hilarity when 85-year-old Hilda tells a story about an armed robbery with a stocking over her head. As midnight strikes, the party breaks up with a scatological poem from Hilda about how to defecate effectively. Now, I was in Sondershausen sits on a salt mine. The hostel manager persuades me to remain while she organizes a visit to the shaft. Next. So the following day, I was persuaded to stay in Sondershausen for a day. This party had been such a great success, and me as a sort of celebrity dressed as Bach sitting there at the head. And so I was invited to stay a following day. I was going to visit the shaft. They'd organized these visits for me, the castle, and the mayor. I'd have an interview. My chaperone was Manfred Kuhnemund, who was the husband of the birthday girl, and he is keen to show Sondershausen as a musical town worthy of J.S. Bach. He's a member of the Albert Fischer Corps and plays me pleasing male voice renditions of Bach cantatas in the car. Quite a well-known local group, the Albert Fischer Corps. At the mine, next, the words Glück auf are everywhere, the traditional miner's greeting, Manfred tells me. Is there no? This is going to be hopeless, really, because I can't. It's not a saved version of the slides. There's nothing we can do. I do apologise, everyone. Very sorry. So there's Glück auf. Glück auf, the traditional miner's greeting. We descend 650 meters and drive in a Mercedes truck through tunnels which extend as far as the edge of the town above. It ceased production in 1992, 2 years after the turn, and rusting ancient vehicles were left abandoned in the tunnels. We come to an underground lake with a statue of St. Barbara, the patron saint of miners, in the middle. The salt crystals, next, have a reddish hue, and the white veins make the rock resemble slabs of steak, and it's as if we're travelling through the innards, the capillaries and arteries of an enormous sleeping beast. I interviewed the Bürgermeister, Herr Schreier, in the town hall, a box of a building. Next. It was, because I saw it just now, wasn't it? There it is. There's that's the town hall at Sondershausen. With a column, the mayor extolled the virtues of his town and of his hard-working people, and made a joke over coffee about Bach's coffee cantata. Wie schmeckt der Kaffee? He sang, and I responded, lieblicher als 1000 Küsse, which is the response in the cafe cantata. Wie schmeckt der Kaffee süßer, lieblicher als 1000 Küsse? How does the coffee taste sweet? Sweeter than 1,000 kisses. It had occurred to me that many of Bach's best-known pieces were supposed to be performed at andante, or walking pace, and have taken to singing them on the road, maintaining a steady pulse. I took a manuscript book of various pieces with me and sang them as I went, to myself. The coffee cantata is one of them, and so is the air on a G-string from Suite number 3. I keep a manuscript secreted in the only pocket in my frock coat. The Schloss at Sondershausen had long corridors, squeaky with parquet floors. So these are rooms in the Schloss. I think the picture after it shows the building. This is the Blue Room. Rooms empty except for portraits of Hunsteins and Schwarzberg's 2 families, and of Günther, the 1st, the 21st, the 40th, Günther's down the generations. The Blue Room was laid out for a concert and had a bust of the music school's most famous alumnus, Max Reger, in a niche, his brow furrowed and his jowls flabby, dreaming of Bach, and how he too might one day write a fugue. Max Reger is an early 20th century composer who emulated Bach, wrote Bach's in a style of Bach, but slightly modernized to suit the 20th century. And how he too might one day write a fugue. The guide reserved the star exhibit until last, the golden coach. It had no brakes, the guide said. Is there the golden coach? There it is. It had no brakes because it only ever went on flat surfaces. The driver sat on a blue satin cushion, handling the reins of 6 white chargers, and a heavily armed postilion rode at the back. It hadn't been used since 1921, and before that, not since 1895. The following day, I climbed into the Harz Mountains. We go on. Is there anything left?
Good.
There we are. So this is now going up towards Braunlager, ascending through the hills.
I'll try and find this one.
I drank a coffee at an inn where the landlady told me she knew nothing of Bach, but that Johann Wolfgang von Goethe had stayed in one of her rooms in his capacity as Minister of Mines to the Duke of Weimar, and had even left crystals here deposited in a cabinet, green malachite and silvery chalcopyrite. She said the minister had journeyed in the Harz in order to lie low after the notoriety surrounding his first novel, The Sorrows of Young Werther, Die Leiden des jungen Werthers, which had enjoyed cult success to the extent that young men had taken to dressing as the hero in blue and yellow, what it is to be in costume, and even imitated him as far as suicide occasionally. Goethe was not in disguise, she said, but if anyone asked, he was a sketch artist from Gotha. He left the hotel at 6 a.m. to climb the Brocken, the highest mountain in the Harz. What was it, she wondered distractedly, that made a person want to dress up? Hero worship? Escapism? The desire to draw attention to oneself? Egotism? Kleider machen Leute, she said, recalling the story by Gottfried Keller, Clothes Make People, of the humble tailor who had made himself a fur-trimmed cloak and hat so that everyone took him for a man of substance and suitable material for a son-in-law to a magistrate whose daughter had fallen in love with the tailor. The landlady directed me onto the Goethe Weg, the Goethe Way, which took me to the heights, where I would cross the border which had once split Germany in two. The fences challenged many to attempt escape. Let's go on, we should find the rock to Helmut Kleinert. There he is. This I passed on the way. If you just go back one, it's clearer. No? Or one further. There it is. On the 1st of August 1963, 150 meters from here, Helmut Kleinert, for overstepping the demarcation line, was shot. He was 25 years old. He hadn't told his wife his plans until the last minute. They had a daughter, and she, the wife, was pregnant with the second child. He'd found an unmined stretch of land before the fence and made a run for it. The guards had been instructed to shoot on sight. I know this as I later had a correspondence with Herr Kleinert's son and was set to interview his mother when her health failed and she died. So that would have been an article, but in fact it never happened. But I did have a long exchange of emails with Kleinert, which Mikhail Schubert was his name, in fact, the younger man. And he told me many of these details. It was a very tragic set of circumstances. I stayed the night at Braunlager, wandering through forests, singing for security at a gentle walking pace. The Esurientes from Bach's Magnificat, the Latin words Esurientes implevit bonis, translation of the English text, he hath filled the hungry with good things, et divites demissit inanes, and the rich sent empty away. Braunlager is famous for the planting of Germany's first potatoes. Let's go on, there it is. Here, the first attempts at planting potatoes was made. The name Kartoffelhecker, the potato hedge, as late as 1748, as this plaque reminds us. That's quite late, 1748, considering Walter Raleigh brought one here in the end of the 16th century. But potatoes very soon became the mainstay, one of the mainstays of the German diet, as I'm sure many of you know, Kartoffelsalat. The next day, I walked in the shadow of the Brocken with the radio mast and so-called Stasi Mosque forever visible at its summit. So that's the top, that's the highest mountain in the Brocken. It's about as high as Mount Snowdon in Wales. And I wasn't going to climb it. I needed to make my way more quickly to Lübeck. In old East Germany, the mountain had been inaccessible to ordinary walkers. It had been fenced off, and the radio mast and the what they called the Stasi Mosque set of offices at the top. I stopped for lunch at the Königskrug, a huge former hotel, stagecoach hotel, now much used by cyclists. The landlord offers me a Kümmerling, a schnapps, spiced up with herbs, and on long walks it's now my custom to fortify myself with a shot. I've taken that habit to heart. The landlord instructs me to take the Kaiserweg this time, now to Bad Harzburg on the northern edge of the Harz. The Brocken became distant in the haze. Next. Oh, these are pictures of the sorrows of young Werther in a different order. But so there's the hotel. There's the Kaiserweg, and there's another shot of the Brocken. There should be one of Misty in the Haze. Did you already see it? There it is. There's that rather fine view of the Brocken. Goethe's Faust ascends and is ridiculed by the witches. Who did he think he was? A mere man pitting himself against spirits and immortals. The last witch burning took place in 1607, though 2 women were thrown into the oubliette of Wernigerode Castle in 1637, where they froze to death. According to the judge, they had admitted by their own mouths an intention to fly on Walpurgisnacht, the 1st of May, from the Hexentanzplatz, the witches' dance place at Thale, to the Brocken, where they would make a ritual marriage with the devil himself. So said the judge. At Bad Harzburg, we go on. This is Bad Harzburg now. Next one. There's the town in a coat of arms. Everything is clean and neat, and the warm springs invite customers to disrobe even in the chill of October. Even the coat of arms has a bare-chested welcome. There is no accommodation available, and I decide to make good the sunlight and continue on to Wienenburg, with much of the journey accompanied by a dog water from Braunschweig, where I was headed. Go there. Now that I'm afraid that go back to. It's been obscured. I'm very sorry, but there's Hitler and the brown shirts with him. Braunschweig is notorious in German recent history because it's the city which legitimized Adolf Hitler, who was an Austrian, but they gave him citizenship, Staatsangehörigkeit, and so he was able to represent politically in Germany. The next day I walked on to, so after Wienenburg, the next day I walked on to Wolfenbüttel, a pretty town with a famous church. There it is, in which the composer Michael Praetorius had spent his entire career. Praetorius, we know, is the composer of the Christmas carol, Es ist ein Ros entsprungen. There is no a rose of such virtue, it's often sung, and was one of Sebastian Bach's heroes. British troops were stationed here among its proud half-timbered buildings and canal following the war. Just a couple more. That's the town centre in Wolfenbüttel. And carry on.
Again, the slides don't match up.
No, I know. There's the canal and one or two scenes of the streets. There we are. So it's a very well preserved town, Wolfenbüttel. Although a lot of this has been rebuilt after the war. As Frank pointed out in his Nuremberg talk, well, actually, we haven't had it here yet, but that's coming in June. But there was a debate in many towns and cities in Germany after the war as to whether the ruins should be rebuilt in modern style, left as ruins, or rebuilt in old style, which is what many towns and cities chose to do. By evening, I had reached Braunschweig, whose football team just happened to be playing at home against the mighty Bayern Leverkusen, and I was accosted by a rowdy group of fans who, on discovering my identity, proceeded to fit football chant-wise the words Johann Sebastian to the melody of Guantanamera. Guantanamera, Johann Sebastian. It just about fits. Anyway, they continued with me for a few streets, chanting this name, which is quite impressive for a football crowd to have made that association. There is the ground here. The picture you see mainly is the FC Braunschweig football ground. I was rather foolish the following day as I was leaving the town, as I said to somebody on the way out, "What's that football ground there?" thinking I was in London and it could have been Arsenal or Highbury or West Ham. But of course, this person looked at me very strangely, as if, of course, it's the local town football ground. What else could it be? I left Braunschweig in mist. There it is. That's it, the following morning, passing street workers dressed up more brightly than I was in a high-vis suit. They pointed me in the right direction with no sun to give me clues, past the First World War Memorial with its iron cross and international graffiti. I stopped for more directions at a kiosk where two shopkeepers became excited by my plan, but warned I had a long foot slog ahead of me across the Lüneburger Heath until Gross Erzingen. I waved at traffic as it passed and found myself upon the Gifhorn bypass when two traffic cops approached and said they had reports of someone waving threateningly at the cars. So that's me waving, and there should be the policeman next. Yeah, unfortunately, they're all out of sequence somehow, but there he is. There's the copper. Well, two of them. The other one took the picture. I explained my purpose, and they said they'd take me to a safer spot, which I agreed to if they would allow their picture to be taken. And as you can see, he's smiling in the photograph there. Rather a touching picture. The press were waiting for me at Gross Erzingen, and I was happy to be interviewed over a large bowl of salad at my overnight accommodation, which my two kiosk friends had arranged. The next day I was on the Lüneburg Heath again, this time to Uelzen. As I neared the township, I began to notice dormobiles parked by the road, half secluded by the trees. Carry on. It's where this one here. Half secluded by the trees. Each had a woman at the wheel. The penny dropped when I passed one covered in red hearts called the Love Bus. This was a pickup spot for sex workers. A girl of foreign extraction wound down the window. "I'm walking to Lübeck," I said. "What about you?" "I'm working," she said, and laughed. I asked her if I could take a photo, but of course she refused. "Try the next girl," she suggested. "She does photos." She told me she came from Martinique and had been in Germany 16 years. As a journalist, one gets the facts. I arrived at Uelzen at 3:30. Next. So next one after this should be there, 3:30 on the clock. or Holdenstedt in fact, which had a park bench on a village green, where I sat and ate a sausage until pestered by a dachshund, which emerged from the courtyard to see if I had any left. The town had somehow the atmosphere of an English village, enhanced by this memorial, if we go one back, to Le Major Barefoot, who seems to have met his end on 18th of April 1945. Vive le Major Barefoot, Colonel, September 1945. I'm unable to find out anything else about him, but that was there in the undergrowth at Uelzen. I walked on to Lüneburg on the northern boundary of the heath and cast my shadow on the road sign in the autumn sun. The cobbled streets, so here we are, Lüneburg now, we're right there, so this is 3/4 of the journey through. The cobbled streets were welcoming, students were everywhere, it's a university town. And this is where Sebastian had gone to school and been a chorister at St. Michael's Church. This is St. Michael's Church, carry on.
Oh, hang on.
If you can. Johann Sebastian Bach sang in the choir here of the Particularschule des Michaelisklosters in the time 1700 to 1702. So just before he goes to Arnstadt, he's singing here at St. Michael's Church in Lüneburg. Bach was no child prodigy like Mozart, but a curious and hard-working boy who read and studied and hurt his eyes by candlelight studying, which in later life would lead to blindness. He taught himself composition by copying out the works of established composers as a mechanic takes apart an engine. So now continue. This is the town hall in Lüneburg, rather a grand place, and here I stayed for a couple of nights, for one night, with an interview for the radio at the end of the next day. Following slide, please. The Lübeck-Lüneburg Canal. I now follow this for quite a stretch of the journey. And here I made the acquaintance of Pastor Lopau, who was a Lutheran priest sitting beside the canal. I have no pictures of him, but he was rather taken with my outfit, and he'd had a few sherries for lunch, and so he became quite talkative, and we had a very long conversation about Bach, about English culture. He was extremely fond of John Milton as a poet, and his tutor had read him the entire Paradise Lost when he was younger. And evensong in an English cathedral was something that was very dear to his heart, as it is to mine. And so we engaged quite at length for a while. Büchen was his town, and so we made for Büchen. Büchen is a town that is at the crossroads of many different forms of communication, railway lines, canal, and roads. And because of that, it was a target in the war. And he told me, Pastor Lopau, that his father, he'd lived there all his life. His father was the town baker, and when the Allies started bombing Büchen, the entire town congregated in the underpass, but in the centre of the village, underpassing the railways and the roads. Okay, there'll be a picture of the underpass in a minute. That is the canal. This is a most extraordinary piece of technology. The canal, or it's an aqueduct really, high across the countryside, and this is a lift. Boats, a ship lift, a Schiffaufzug. boats arrive here at the low level and then are raised up to, that is water within that canal, comes to a sudden end there, and they continue on their journey at that level. And the canal itself is very broad. It's not like an English canal, which are just enough for two longboats to pass each other, two barges. These canals in Germany are almost as wide as motorways. They're vast, they're really wide. And I followed this for quite a number of miles after this. If we continue. This is not past the low power, this is just a gentleman I met by the wayside, the river once again on the right hand side. Next. This is the underpass at Büchen, so quite substantial. And as we went through this, past the low power, he touched these walls very sort of affectionately. This was something that was personal to the town. It had saved them. It had been their refuge when the bombs were falling. And I stayed the night in Büchen before making my way on the next day. Next, please. This is now the Saxon salt route. Alter Weg nach Güster, the Limes Saxoniae. It's an ancient thoroughfare. There's the next picture will show it slightly more clearly as well. There we are. It's ancient and cobbled, and this takes me all the way more or less to Lübeck. Next. And here I arrive at Lübeck. A passerby took this photograph of me climbing on the roadside. And this was the picture that was at the front of the piece in the Times when it was eventually published. So I completed my journey, which at the start I thought I might never do. I was simply doing this as an experiment, not sure that I would actually complete it, but I did get there, and here, 12 days on from the start, is my arrival. Next. I make straight for the Marienkirche, which is the famous cathedral of Lübeck. It's the town symbol. Images of the twin towers of the Mary Church, St. Mary's Church, are instantly recognizable as Lübeck. And I attended an organ recital by the current organist, Ernst Erich Stender, whom I'd already been in correspondence with. He was expecting me. The press also were there, and we did a little interview at the same time. So I gave a little speech to the audience, telling them about my journey before the concert. Carry on, there'll be a picture of the organ in a minute. Ernst Erich Stender. There's the ruins. This was how it looked in the war. This was the bombing after the war. And again, Lübeck is decided to rebuild rather than tear down the old and start again. They rebuilt this magnificent cathedral, and you wouldn't know anything had happened now when you go into the cathedral. This is the Totentanzorgel, the death dance organ. It's called that because there is a famous medieval painting of the dance of death, the devil dancing with various members of the community in a painting, and that is beneath this organ, which is a magnificent instrument played by Ernst Erich Stender, and in Bach's day played by Buxtehude, Dietrich Buxtehude, a Danish organist who was Bach's great hero. And it had been his intention when he left Arnstadt to attend the concerts given by Dietrich Buxtehude, called the Advent concerts, the Advent Musiken, at the same time of year that I did the walk in 2005. He had perhaps the intention of becoming Buxtehude's apprentice. If he had taken that option, he would have been obliged to marry Buxtehude's daughter, who was then in her 30s. It was part of the conditions. Dietrich Buxtehude was looking for not only an apprentice, but also a son-in-law. And this elder daughter was available. History has been rather unkind to her, suggesting, because Handel also visited Buxtehude, knowing that this was a possibility of becoming both son-in-law and apprentice. But history suggests that she wasn't very good looking and she was already rather old. But I was able to suggest that at the end of my journey, in which I had imitated Bach, wearing the same fancy dress costume for 2 weeks on the road in all weathers, it was probably her that was rather put off by J.S. Bach stinking when he arrived in Lübeck than the other way round. So I hope I maybe did her a favour in history by making that conclusion. So there, finally, the press in Germany, this is the Lübecker Nachrichten, the Lübeck News, Wanderung frei nach Johann Sebastian Bach. There I am, beneath the organ of the Marienkirche. They've managed to find a picture of Bach which looks reasonably like the character I'm portraying there, although without the beard. That's an uncorroborated picture of Bach. It's thought to be, but not confirmed, but it gives a reasonable likeness. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all very much for coming this evening to this talk and to attending at home. I'm sorry about the unfortunate sequence of slides that you've had to put up with. Again, once technology has been the better of us. So apologies for that. If there are any questions, I know it's now gone 8 o'clock, but if anyone wishes to ask anything. Imo?
I'm going to make an experiment of connecting to that speaker by Bluetooth so that people online can ask a question. You have to go with it.
Okay. Well, if anyone wishes to ask a question, I'd be happy to try and answer it. Otherwise,
yes,
there is a glance.
I've got a question.
Back at this, at the back of the church.
I've got a question.
Thank you.
A fascinating journey.
Thank you, Frank.
Very well described. What would you say was the highlights? Or was it getting to Lübeck or something along the way?
It was the knowledge that I had done what Bach had done, and in a sense discovered something about his life at the same time. His commitment to walking, the speed of the pieces that he wrote, which are so often walking pace, and somehow a connection with the music that he wrote and the countryside that he passed through. So it's that sense of having done what has already been done, an imitation, and imitation is flattery, and I'm in a sense proud to have done the honour of a great composer in completing the walk. So that's really what it is. Yes.
So you look completely relaxed by the time you got to the end. You didn't look like you were tired out.
Yeah, but you didn't smell me.
Just looking 12 days walking, yeah.
And well, thank you for saying that. I felt good. Certainly it was a relief at the end of the journey, and so that would have raised my mood. And there were times along it when I thought, you know, am I going to have to quit early? Am I going to get blisters? Am I going to have to stop and, you know, admit to failure? But that didn't happen, and so at the end I do look reasonably pleased with myself. Yes. Hello.
Why did Bach mock? Couldn't he have sort of got a taxi, you know, the stagecoach?
Very good question. In his epitaph, his obituary, which was written by his son, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, mentions this journey as something very significant in Bach's life, and adds, und zwar zu Fuß, and what's more, on foot. So it was recognized right from that point that he had made this journey on foot. Whether he had made that a commitment to go on foot, And perhaps he had taken the odd lift here and there, who knows? But basically, it was he went on foot from Arnstadt to Lübeck, and taxis, I don't know, but he certainly, it was a foot journey, and it's gone down in history as being that. Yes. I have to confess, I did take one or two lifts myself. It was a bit too far for some of those stretches, but occasionally I was offered a short stretch to go. When I stayed the night in Sondershausen, for instance, they offered me a lift the next day to make up the ground that I would have lost, but it was an insignificant amount, really. So I can claim that I did it on foot. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering about the 50 miles of policemen. Yeah.
Yes.
Was there a lift involved in that?
No, those policemen, they took me to a safer spot. That was the only lift there. But the town of Groß Erzingen is right in the centre, so it was two 25-mile stretches. So it wasn't it was 50 miles in the 2 days. It was just doable. That was what the discussion had been with the chaps in the kiosk before I set off. They were very interested in the journey and the details. Imo.
A question come up on the chat from Claire.
Yes.
How long did Bach take to actually complete the journey?
He took 13 days, 13 or 14 days. We know because he arrived for the start of the Abendmusiken concerts in late October. And we know the date that he set off. What we don't know is his exact route, but given that he arrived on time, he probably went through the mountains as well. It's just that there's no evidence.
There was no canal at that time to follow.
There was no canal either to follow, but so however he did it, we're not entirely sure. But he was used to walking.
What made you choose?
He enjoyed his walks. I think that becomes clear. So there we are. I think that's enough now. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you. Very kind. I should say what next month is, but offhand I can't remember what it is. Can you remember? No, can't remember. But I know what it is. It's from the London, the Museum of Archaeology. It's the archaeology. They're going to talk about a young woman is an archaeologist, is giving us a talk on the discovery of the Boar's Head Theatre site on Whitechapel Road, which should be very interesting because it was completely unknown until about 4 years ago that there was the remains of a Shakespearean theatre. So that's in a month from now. March is the 3rd Tuesday of March, which it has the same date, of course, every year, 21st of March. So thanks. Thank you.